just everything's happening a lot quicker than people expect it is. So the most powerful thing you can do is take the latest data point, then you can show just how quick progress is, because change is happening so quickly. It's really kind of frustrating when you see so many people behind the curve. Actually, the biggest piece of flack that we had from all of that was from JP Morgan, who just didn't go about kind of almost believing the numbers, and people were struggling to believe just how cheap this technology has become.
So is it sustainable for the US to take this kind of muscular doubling down on fossil fuel approach? I mean, does it work for their own economy?
It's a choice they're going through, right? It doesn't make any sense to the rest of us.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ben Backwell. I'm the CEO of the Global Wind Energy Council and the chair of Global Renewables Alliance. Welcome to the Powering the Future podcast. I am delighted this afternoon to be sitting here in Lisbon talking to none other than Dave Jones, co-founder of Ember, who you will have seen all over your social feeds with great data and great presentation of data in new ways around the energy transition. So Dave, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ben.
And, really big congratulations on the work that you guys have been doing. I somehow see you guys a lot more than I was seeing a couple of years ago. And you seem to be really kind of present across lots of platforms, used in policymaker reports and people's conversations. So tell us a little bit about Ember, the project, where it came from and where it's going.
Yeah, we were born out of the work that we did before 2020. For 7 years, we're working on coal phase out across Europe with Sandbag. And then as those years went on, all the European countries were really stepping up into that, and they actually did what we thought might be impossible, and actually made pledges to phase out coal, which is really exciting. And then by the time we got to 2020, Europe was in quite a good place. Its route out of coal, 80% of the coal was left within Asia. Where to go there? What happens there? What we wanted to do was take some of that work that we've been doing within Europe to a more global audience. What happened then in 2021 was the Glasgow COP, where you had the phase out of coal, phase down of coal conversation. Coal was vilified. Everyone knew coal was bad, but then people wanted to know about the solutions. That really opened up a whole new space to talk around the power of wind and solar and the power of how clean energy can help you get off coal and oil and gas.
So you took the conversation global. Tell us a little bit about how the research side, which is the side you work on, which is very, very powerful, fits in with the advocacy side. And how are you sort of balancing those two activities?
Well, one of the key things that's happening is that just everything's happening a lot quicker than people expect it is. So the most powerful thing you can do is take the latest data points and keep showing people the latest data points. And when you can do that, then you can show just how quick progress is, because it's so hard because change is happening so quickly. It's really kind of frustrating when you see so many people behind the curve. Specifically, for example, the last 18 months, a lot of my work has been involved with battery, trying to articulate how quickly that has come as a technology. What we can see today with battery is so different from what it was 2 years ago, not just on cost, but on the quality of that product in itself.
How well do you think what you know and your data show you is being reflected in policymaker conversations and the data and the information that's circulating amongst policymakers?
It's great having kind of certain data points that people can grab hold of and get a little bit visual with. It's hard to know how that level of impact then kind of tracks down from there. One of our main kind of routes to impact is with policymakers to try to give them the latest data points so they understand what's going on, that they can make sensible decisions. In terms of the broader audience and how you filter down from that, it's very, very hard. So I don't think we're under any illusions that we're kind of, reaching out to the public and they're seeing our work and understanding that in quite the same way. And that's really, I think, the big challenge for all of us is how do we reach beyond that clique that we're in already to tell that story to other people that their main role, their main task, their main thought process isn't in energy.
But I mean, do you want to do that? I mean, is that your aim for the conversation to go further down into society, further down than the kind of elite policymaker discussion with the people who are experts on the energy? I mean, how broad do you want the discussion, or the diffusion of your data to be?
I think that we're in a point now where the role of people is just critical to the transition. So what we've seen so far with the build out of wind and solar, a lot of it's been happening almost in the background, where people aren't necessarily aware or can see that or understand how big that is, because it's just the kind of the electricity grid in the background. And what's happening in the next stage with electrification is, how do people change their way of heating? How do people change the way they drive with electric cars? And that requires a lot more understanding of energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, a lot of what I see from you, is about capturing the rate of change. I mean, it sounds from what you were saying that you don't see, a real appreciation of just how fast and how profound the changes are. I mean, that seems to be kind of what you're focused on quite a lot, right? To say, look, this is happening, and it's happening at a way faster pace than people thought. What's stopping that realization from happening?
A lot of it's just the natural time lag that comes out, right? Because I think that you see bits of story being teased out, but then things will backtrack in a certain way. It's just so hard. There's so much going on for people to absorb, for people to understand. You kind of have one data point, they're not going to see the trend that's coming from it. How do you? So it's just so hard to package that in a way that's useful, meaningful for people, that they can understand what's going on.
Okay, but so, I mean, you're out there obviously with your data. There's other people out there as well. So I don't know, the IEA is out there, IRENA is out there. There's I don't know, what used to be the BP, Statistical Review of Energy. There's other reports, research out there. How well do you think everyone else is capturing what's happening? I mean, if you thought they were capturing it adequately, you would be there.
I mean, I read a report last week that came out on firming up renewables. I thought was great. Trying to cover that. It was so I thought that was really good. I think some of the IEA work is extraordinarily good. I think that they're now going through a bit of a kind of internal change process of how they cope with the US impact on them. And it'll be interesting to see how they come out of that. Already you can see quite a lot of that narrative have changed. You can see them going back into providing lots of data points and lots of data, but less so on the narrative, less so on the big picture of what does this mean? And it's almost kind of created a bit of a gap where you can see some of the data, but you just can't assimilate it into the actions that you can take going forward.
Yeah, no, for sure. And ultimately, international institutions reflect the politics of element to a certain degree, right? But the data is the data as well. How long have you been tracking the kind of key data around the transition?
I've been an electricity analyst since Clifton University, so I moved into TXU, which got bought out by Power Gen and Eon. I followed around for 13 years in front office electricity trading. So looking at the hedging the portfolio of the power plants. So it's kind of extended from there.
Because I guess one of the things is that I used to be a journalist myself and was an analyst. I guess one of the things I remember back in those days, and I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago, is that pretty much everybody got wrong the growth curves for wind and solar and the renewables technology, right? I mean, for years and years and years, the main international institutions looking at energy were just completely behind the curve, right? Then they kind of caught up. And there was this kind of period around Glasgow where you got the net zero scenario, you got the scenarios, for instance, the IRENA scenario, WITA, etc. And it was almost like the world caught up a little bit. Do you think that process is kind of lagging a bit, and that's why you guys need to redouble your work?
I think that the data in itself is extraordinarily important. The insights from that data are really important. I think one of the bits that has been missing really is a vision of that people can really grab hold of. One of our most popular bits of work within Ember was the electrotech revolution the Kingsmill Bonds team did. And it was really good for trying to pull a different audience to get excited around clean energy, and and how the energy transition is going. That kind of audience is not really involved with it at all. Certainly has no climate basis or climate interests at all. The kind of tech bros of the world, for example, that found it very compelling. But there's a whole need to get a new vision out there that people that can get a hold of, get excited about this. And I think that's what people are really struggling with at the moment. We had the Net Vision Zero. That's had some kind of problems and now being tainted with a bit of a bad brush. What steps in to replace that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Kingsmill, who we know well as well from his previous work and his work at Ember, and his team came out with this electrotech revolution report. Had a big impact. First of all, was that your term, or was that term already around, electrotech?
Kingsmill's far too modest. He says he stole it from someone else, but I'm not sure where it came from, where it was before, but he certainly managed to popularize it and bring it into the common discourse.
Yeah, it certainly seemed to resonate, and it had, it was suddenly talked about by quite a lot of people. You could see it in the conversation popping up. I mean, first of all, just give us a very quick recap for the audience who may not be familiar. What does he mean by that?
We go all the way back to the beginning. It's do you look at energy from a primary energy perspective? Net zero came along, and then you look at energy from an emissions perspective. This is really trying to look at energy from a final use perspective, from an efficiency perspective, and really try to show how innovation and manufacturing can change that. We're in a world where so many of the clean energy products are almost kind of consumable products, small in scale, that can be iterated. The manufacturing can be built up at scale in a way that that can develop that far quicker than conventional energy has ever seen.
And give us a couple of examples of countries, markets that are moving fastest towards becoming electrostates, or already are.
So I'll give you the most shocking one, which is that we track renewable electricity targets to 2030, and the country with the biggest rise in their electricity system shifting to renewables this decade, on paper, according to their target, is Saudi Arabia. So they started the decade at zero renewables, and they've been building a program of solar and wind and battery. They're probably not on target to meet it at the current rates. We'll see how it goes. But it's really interesting to see how even an oil state like that can see the value in just how cheap and just how useful clean electricity is into its mix.
Yeah, and of course, in the case of Saudi, I mean, maximize export revenues from fossil fuel, keep those export revenues going as long as there's a market, but with some kind of realization there is an end game as well, and also for your own domestic economy to electrify as quickly as possible, right? Because, like you said, there's so many uses for it, and it's such an enabler for advancing.
Yeah, where we are with the current energy crisis is that it's just interesting that they don't go to gas, they're going towards renewables. You're at the point in the last couple of years after the Ukraine crisis that renewables is kind of winning that battle with gas. Like LNG hasn't been growing at the rate that people had been expecting. That's really cool. And I think out of all the biggest changes from the energy crisis that's coming through at the moment now is the potential to take on oil. I think that's very new. When you look at where oil is at the moment in terms of the price rises across the world, the petrol prices are really biting for people. There's queues at the pumps. I was in Nairobi last week where 4 people were killed in petrol price rise protest. It's coming really, really pertinent. And now that technology in electric vehicles has got to the point where it's so good that it's able to compete with oil on a level footing. It kind of feels like that's the next step.
Yeah, and I want to go to that in a second and talk a little bit about Asia as well as thoughts that you have around that. But just to kind of close off on this electrostate idea, I mean, okay, so China clearly moving towards being an electrotech state. I mean, would you say places like Spain and Portugal as well have very high degrees of renewables in their systems? I mean, are they, what does it take to go from having high penetration of renewables to becoming an electrotech?
Yeah, I don't think it's anywhere in Europe that's got close to that yet. I think that when you look at how electricity runs through the veins of China's energy system, there's so much power by electricity, not just on the transport and the heating, but also on the industry itself and the way it's been built up. And I think that that's where Europe has been behind on this. When the Ukraine crisis came down, it looked at building more wind and solar. Didn't really think about that electrification side as much. It's now determined not to make the same mistake again, and it's bringing in a real kind of rapid series of measures to try to help electrify the economy, which is super exciting to see.
Yeah, let's go to that. That's a good segue. So we're in the midst of this new oil and gas crisis. As you said, I mean, Europe's big moment of crisis was in 2022 with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It did lead to a fairly strong push for renewables and an acceleration for renewables. But as you said, the electrification piece wasn't first focus. Now we can say that Asia is going through its Ukraine moment, right? And tell us a little bit about how Asia is responding to the fossil fuel crisis compared to Europe. Both of Europe and Asia are the most exposed, we have to point out, to fossil fuel imports of any regions in the world, right?
Yeah, when you kind of take a step back on energy security, 3/4 of the world population live in countries that are net importers of fossil fuels, and they're either mostly in Europe or in Asia. So much of Asia is dependent on imports, and the reason is that when you look at the global reserves, 42% of the global reserves of coal are in Asia, but only 8% of gas and 3% of oil. When the oil and gas coming out of the Strait of Hormuz was stopped, 80% of that has been heading towards Asia. So it's now Asia that's got that oil and gas crisis going on. When you look within the power sector doesn't use that much oil. It uses, in some countries, a bit of gas, but China's only 3% gas, India's 1-2% gas. Actually, the power sector is the least impacted of all the energy sectors in the crisis today. The areas that are really impacted are transport from oil and industry for gas.
Yeah, and so what has that done in terms of policy and economic change in Asia? I mean, one of the things is much higher rates of electrification in Asia than in Europe, right?
Yeah, that was the trend before. It's an insane. I mean, you talk about China's rise in electrification, but it's insane that Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia all have a higher electrification rate than either the US or Europe. This is a whole of Asia story. But somehow they've ended up wanting to build up electricity with renewables, but also with the coal base, trying to avoid that import of oil and gas because they have the structural shortfall. And that, by definition, has led to a more electrified economy. And you would think that they would then double down going into this. So far, the evidence is that it is a kind of like a series of kind of smaller responses on that. There's big the one that's really interesting from my perspective is on the solar and battery announcement by the Indonesian president about stepping up into that. There's the Philippines energy emergency, which is really interesting, which will hopefully cut the permitting and planning for a lot of the renewables auctions that are in the pipeline at the moment and speed those up. So there's a lot of response like that coming out at the moment. I think that just kind of 2 months in, they're still in a bit of a state of kind of shock, trying to deal with the day-to-day of what's going on. There's physical kind of shortfalls of petrol causing protests within the countries. There's trying to sort that out almost before they then take a step back and then kind of consider the next step. But that's going to be to try to cut their dependence on oil and gas. That much is clear.
Yeah. As you said, though, in Asia, I know, take a country like Vietnam, it's electrifying very quickly. Anecdotal evidence with things like massive uptick in purchase of EVs, right, in Vietnam. A generation base though that's still quite coal heavy, which they would like to phase out. But then, there's some challenges around implementing, right, and getting things done and replacing that whole coal base. So, I mean, starting from the other side, them electrifying first, but still having coal in their generation system. I mean, is that a better way to do it? Does it make it easier then to?
It's a bit upside down, isn't it? I guess we've always sat here assuming coal was the dirtiest fuel and it was going to get phased out first. Ultimately, oil and gas are more expensive in Asian countries. They have that domestic supply of coal. They don't have that of oil and gas. They need to be dependent on oil and gas. So we're in this situation now where rather than talk about how do you get off coal as quickly as possible, it's how do you get off oil and gas as quickly as possible. From an emissions perspective, this could be even bigger. We look at the scale of oil is 10 times as big as LNG. LNG is. This is a huge opportunity I think for renewables to step in and to actually start powering more of the energy economy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, I think there's still a strong push to phase the coal out or at least not build more. And secondly, like you said, I mean, you're creating demand there for the next kind of wave of renewables as well. For you guys, that whole phase out piece, I mean, I think when the crisis started, there was some worry about locking in coal. Or coal even making a comeback, or countries switching on more coal. That doesn't really seem to happen, right?
No, we did quite a bit of analysis of it, and there's two things to say on that. The first one is that before the crisis, gas was already more expensive than coal, so you can't switch from gas back into coal when you've already switched from gas into coal. You can't do it twice. So there's very few pockets of gas to coal switching that have been available. So just there isn't a natural pick up in that. The only other way that coal can pick up is if units come back from retirement. There's a few units in Germany and Italy that are under discussion. Like they'll come to anything. They would just require too much subsidy to come back. But when you look across the rest of the world, there isn't a whole pool of retired coal power plants sitting there in a position to come back.
Yeah, no, we work, quite a lot in Vietnam, Philippines, other places in the region, and we certainly see push, accelerating for renewables and kind of strong policy desire not to.
Yeah, and the one active one obviously was around the Philippines being brought back, that discussion about whether they should lift their coal moratorium, and that got knocked down pretty quickly within the Philippines parliament, and because of their plan to step on renewables and to accelerate renewables, which is the way out, the route they've chosen and the route that they're happy with.
Yeah. So a pretty optimistic panorama, I think, for Asia, right? I think we'd agree on that. And with Europe now starting to address electrification more of a systematic way as well. What do you think is the main thing holding us back? Or are we not being held back? Because your reports are pretty gung-ho.
Oh, there's a lot holding us back. Where to start? No, the most important thing I think is just that misinformation that's out there, and the disinformation out there at the moment that's trying to tear away the public discourse and try to keep people locked into fossil fuels. I think that what we're seeing at the moment is so much of that coming from the United States. And the United States is really interesting just from a pure economics of clean energy perspective. Clean energy is more expensive in the US than most other countries. Fossil fuels is also cheaper in the US than in most other countries. The economics of relative clean energy versus fossil aren't the same as the rest of the world. And so many commentators in the US are just looking at the rest of the world, not understanding how attractive the economics of clean energy are to us.
Well, we've done pretty well for electricity in the US, right, over the last 10, 15 years, right? In terms of, renewables being able to compete, even with the shale gas boom, low gas prices here, we've gone out there and we've been able to compete and win in many markets, right?
Absolutely. And I hope that'll continue. I guess the way to say there's so many things to say on this. I just feel like I guess the area certainly of like positivity for the States at the moment is on the EV side, in that just in what's happening with the pump price of petrol at the moment. People drive so much in the States.
But do you think prior to that, the economics for EVs were just not as good in the US as in other places? I mean, is that the case?
It's really strange because it takes a bit of jolt for people to want to get up and kind of vote with their feet and take action. And sometimes it takes a crisis to do that. When you saw the big pickup of rooftop in solar in Europe, that actually started happening at the time that the Ukraine crisis happened. The people wanted to make a move. They had more expensive electricity, but they also wanted to make a bit of a statement as well. And I think that that's one of the reasons why there's such an opportunity coming out of the energy crisis right now, is that people are looking at clean energy and assessing it. And this is that kind of push factor they need to get them over the line.
But do you think, has it also got to do with US industry and supply chains? Because, there was this whole moment, the Biden administration, Inflation Reduction Act, kind of let's go out and compete with China and make sure we have our own generation, clean generation technology, but also, let's make sure we're doing EVs, make sure we're doing other electrotech as well. And that then, effectively stalled or was stopped in its tracks on the policy side when Trump won the last election. And then the whole thing kind of went into reverse. But was that also a consequence of the fact that their industry wasn't set up, to compete, and that made it a lot harder? So, I mean, it's harder to get a hold of the right consumer gear in US because they don't make it, or they don't make it as well as China. I mean, is there
quite possibly? I mean, there's certainly an element that the US have the strongest tariffs in there, right? So when you look at a lot of the countries, they there's like some of that technology will be coming from China. So there's a tariff element to that. I don't quite know. I'm not sure what you're getting at.
I guess this is interesting. Do you see, it goes to your point, you were saying about the relative economics, but taking it a little bit further from that, do you see a situation where we have this kind of bifurcation in the world? And we seem to have a little bit at the moment, right? Where the US essentially doubles down on fossil fuels. They make that kind of their kind of USP is we're going to be the fossil fuel people, and we're going to benefit from the economics of it. We're going to export because net exporter now, and we're going to try and sell our product, and we're not going to do big investments in EVs because we don't need to, and we're going to try and keep the price at a certain level. I mean, can you see a world where we have that for a while?
And
then everybody else is just doing something different?
I think clearly for like at least 1 year, maybe 2 years now, we have been in that world where the US is turned to be very pro-fossil. And that's been causing kind of like narratives to be spread out across the world from there. Because of that relative economics that's so different from the US. The US is not the rest of the world. The US is its own, has got more expensive. Sorry, I've kind of lost the theme with all of this.
You're right to keep just fingering. But I mean, okay, but do the economics work kind of mid-term, long-term for the US? And I'm thinking particularly around data centers, which is another area which you and your team has written about quite a lot. The whole kind of stronger demand from AI. I mean, what I've seen in the US the last couple of years is they're making it more difficult for renewables, although renewables are still growing quite a big rate, solar and onshore wind in the US. B, power prices are going up for consumers because the data centers are competing for power in some places with power for consumers. So we've seen big hikes in like Maryland, Virginia, and places like that in power centers. And then there seems to be, if all the excitement or hype about the AI boom is right, then we're looking at a kind of exponential growth in demand that can't be addressed by fossil fuels. And some of that's because of the supply chain. We know there's big waiting lists for gas turbines, for instance. Some of that is just, you need renewables to do it. So is it sustainable for the US to take this kind of muscular doubling down on fossil fuel approach? I mean, does it work for their own economy?
It's a choice they're going through, right? It doesn't make any sense to the rest of us. It's a choice they're going through. I guess the bit that frustrates me a little bit is like some of the tech companies have always been coerced into that route unnecessarily. If it hadn't been for kind of pressure from above, would they be embracing renewables more rapidly, more openly than they actually are? It feels like that gas route is almost kind of forced upon them, which is sad, given that renewables is there and arguably cheaper and quicker to deploy than gas would be.
So part of it is just an activist administration, and that will go away once the activist administration goes away.
Yeah, and it's just been very interesting to see how almost kind of subservient the tech companies have been to that pro-fossil approach.
Yeah, I've got just two more questions for you. But the first one is around, what's the best way to do the transition and to optimize technology? I mean, obviously, I work in the wind sector, but I've also worked in other renewables. I'm chair of Global Renewables Alliance. I work with solar, with storage, with our technologies, as well as with wind. I mean, there seems to be an idea, and this is something I've pushed back with you personally a few times. There seems to be kind of an idea that you just put up solar panels, you do some batteries, and that is kind of, the economics of that decarbonizes the world and is competitive and, optimal. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that there seems to be that kind of vague, that kind of idea around in some forms. Like, from my point of view, that isn't optimal. I mean, we absolutely love solar, put as much solar on the system as possible, great. But in terms of, providing, constant, reliable, renewable power 24/7 in the most optimal way, particularly.
So let's talk about.
Yeah, let me have you start.
Let's talk about the Sun Belt specifically. So we did a big report last year which talked around really trying to highlight how far battery had come to show how far solar and battery together can get to high reliability across much of the Sun Belt for a very cheap price. We may have been a bit lazy with that. We may have gone with the easy approach of just looking at solar and battery by itself without bringing wind into that argument. Certainly.
And not just, by the way, I'm not just riding the actual wind. I'm also talking about things like long-duration storage, hydro, pumps. That's kind of how do we kind of get the right mix of things?
Yeah, I am certainly on the wind side. There's a couple of correlation effects, positive correlation from effects that the wind really help with in the Sun Belt. There's generally more wind overnight than there is during the day. In India, for example, there's more wind during the monsoon when solar is less. There's a couple of positive effects that certainly helps with. On the long duration energy storage, I'd love to see what that technology has come through. I know there's ones coming through, but at the moment, there's a huge need for that. That's how you get kind of from kind of like the low 90% reliability across the year up toward 100%. Is just to be able to store electricity for a few days. It will really squeeze that last bit of reliability out. And it's just knowing how those technologies will come along. And one of the most interesting things about what's happening with storage is just the amount of technological innovation going in. There's quite a few different technologies that could play a role in that. And it's getting to the scale and the price that they will be able to make a difference.
Yeah, but I mean, do you take a lot of flack? I mean, apart from the flack you get from me, do you take a lot of flack on things like, solar duck curve, can't make any money in places like Iberia, because of the kind of system imbalances, those kind of things. I mean, how do you deal with that, and how do you propose models to governments that can kind of address the short term and the long term?
Specifically on solar, it's incredible just how far it's picked up. That we had this stat of last May globally, 25 during lunchtime at a global level, 25% of the world's electricity across May was coming from solar. Like the daytime electricity in so many countries is so different from how it was a few years ago with that solar coming online. So of course that's an issue, and that's an opportunity in a way as well. But it's also an issue about how you try and resolve coming out.
We certainly see it as an opportunity as well. Just to be clear, I mean, I had my colleague from Investors podcast recently, and he was saying, look, it's a real opportunity for us, and we're optimizing turbines for nighttime, early morning, picking up those times where there's a kind of a gap in the system where you can really command kind of better capture prices as well. And I think generally as an industry, we see opportunities here.
Yeah, and certainly those kind of hybrid approach with battery, with wind, with solar kind of comes quite well. And I feel like that firming of renewables report from Irene really helped deal with that and answer some of those questions. Actually, the biggest piece of flack that we had from all of that was from JP Morgan, who just didn't go about kind of almost believing the numbers with all of this. I think that it comes back to this kind of the European the American economics, where you're sitting there and people are struggling to believe just how cheap this technology has become. And especially when you're sitting in the States, it really is. And I think that people are slowly getting there now and trying to sing that in.
But it makes me think a little bit that the period around 2014, 2015 is when we started winning tenders, both wind and solar. And it was almost like suddenly we see our LCOE was lower than fossil, right? And it was like, okay, game on, we've won. And it took people, quite a lot of time to kind of accept that and to actually look at the numbers year on year and go, my God, it is actually cheaper than fossil. But now I think we're in this sort of second cycle where we're trying to prove now that we can provide firm renewable power. And I think that's our challenge now.
Yeah.
For the next period.
And in so many places in the world, it is just so economic.
Yeah, we're doing great stuff. Like, for instance, in Brazil, for instance, I mean, I was with people recently, a big project, big onshore wind farm that had been built a few years ago. And they're now adding solar farms in the wind farm. It's a huge big wind farm. And you're just taking, you've got incredible nighttime wind, you've got some spare capacity in the connection during the day. So build a solar farm on the wind farm and so on, right? So we certainly see the opportunities. Dave, I'm going to bring this to an end, but maybe just one question for you. I mean, I want to just touch on this electrotech state. I mean, is it going to be fun being in an electrotech state? Is that a fun thing?
I think that one of the really interesting things about that rise in electrification across Asia is when you hear people going across to China, they come back and say, "Oh, it's so quiet and it's so clean," and like cities in Asia now almost kind of treat electricity as like kind of symbol of modernity and prosperity, and it's really interesting to see how kind of weirdly cultural that is. They don't really think about burning fossil fuels. That's not even on their radar. It's just electricity is their go-to source. So is it fun? I don't know. My EV is very fun to drive. But there is a certain kind of feeling that comes from this. I just wonder how we get people to like what the stories are that come from this, how you bring people into this, how you get people excited about this. This is going to be a big change for people, and hopefully a very positive change for people.
Dave, so nice having you on the podcast finally, and keep doing the good research, keep taking the flak. And I think your job at the moment is more important than ever. So thanks, Dave. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Ben.